Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Right in. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for arriving at this early session this morning. So this morning, we're going to be talking to you about advancing research and training on aging, place, and home, or HOMeAGE. And this is essentially a doctoral training network that we'd like to tell you about. But really, the session has a twofold aim. A part is to certainly introduce this network as a mechanism for doing research around complex social topics like aging in place. And the second element is to very much flesh out aging in place and some of the issues and challenges that need to be researched in the context of these kind of networks. So I suppose at a very brief introduction, my name is Kieran Walsh from the Irish Centre for Social Gerontology, and my co-chair is
Marco Cucculelli. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ancona. Thank you, Kieran. Marco Cucculelli, I'm professor in economics and the coordinator of the PhD program at this university. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And thank you very much to Aging and Social Change for inviting us to be here, and indeed for Marco and his colleagues for making us feel so welcome as well. Microphone again. Okay. Like this. Okay, this sounds really unnatural, but anyway, or it feels unnatural. So I guess one of the things that people may not be familiar with is that the doctoral training network we're speaking to you about is a Marie Curie Skłodowski Action Network. And the focus here is on 48 months of a program that investigates big research topics within different areas. So in our case, it's aging in place. But the network itself funds PhD fellowships, funds research fellowships, going from 10 to 15 of these fellowships. But the emphasis is very much on international mobility. So when you're recruiting your doctoral researchers, you can't recruit from inside your own country. And the emphasis is also very much on interdisciplinarity and intersectoral approaches as well. So these are the kind of elements that are encouraged, and these are the kind of elements that we wanted to embrace for the Aging in Place network that we're speaking to you about today. And ultimately, we're in our first month in some ways. So the doctoral students have just taken their place. I think there might be a couple here as well today. And ultimately, we have 36 months ahead of us in terms of these doctoral students. So in today's session, we want to talk to you a little bit about HOMeAGE itself, its aims and objectives, why we felt it was important to do this network, what were the kind of challenges that are going to be addressed, and also maybe say a little bit about some of the features that perhaps might have attracted the funders' interest in terms of funding the network. And I think maybe that might be some transferable lessons for your own interests as well. We will then switch to a panel discussion where we will ask our panel members to make individual contributions around their connection to aging in place. So these are all people who are involved in hosting and in supporting doctoral students. And then we will go on to reveal the real truth around trying to implement one of these and some of the challenges around that international element, around that interdisciplinary element, and around that intersectoral element. So we won't introduce the panel straight away. We'll move straight into the overview, and then that'll give you a better understanding of what people are connecting with as they go along. Okay. So there are really kind of 4 points that we are responding to in terms of why this network was necessary. And if you like, that these are the scientific rationale and I suppose the policy rationale behind the network itself. The first of these is that aging in place is seen as being critical to the lives of older people and critical in the context of aging societies. So we can see that reported preferences for older people are to remain in the community and remain in their own home for as long as possible. But we can also see scientific evidence that would build a really strong case for that. So we can see aging in place might be fundamental to the daily lives of people because of that concentration, because of that contraction of life social worlds within people's immediate neighborhoods and communities. That elevates these communities into a higher level of importance in later life. You can see that there are connections to longer-term health and well-being outcomes where we have a number of neighborhood context studies or a number of literatures around those studies built up to show that evidence. And we also know that there is a really strong connection in terms of a sense of belonging, a sense of identity connected to the place where you live and how that's accumulated over the life course, but also over different sets of places. And I guess in some ways, we can certainly say that during the period of COVID-19, this was really reinforced by the pandemic itself, and maybe made us look a little bit closer to home in terms of what we had around us. The second point is that, unsurprisingly, this is very much reflected within major policy agendas, and in some ways kind of a major orientating concept around some policy agendas as well. So this includes public health, aging related agendas, but also innovation agendas in so many different ways. So we see it in the WHO's Decade of Healthy Aging, we see it in the EU Green Paper on Aging, obviously the age-friendly environments, but we also see it in broader frameworks that encourage sustainability, that encourage community-based infrastructure, such as the Pillar on Social Rights and such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But what's interesting, I suppose, is that increasingly aging in place is seen as being one of the frameworks that will allow the silver economy to grow and to increase in size. And again, that's emphasized in various different policy documents. And I suppose underlying a lot of these kind of emphasis from a policy sphere is the concern around sustainability of systems, around fiscal and social sustainability, given advanced demographic aging structures that are coming into certain places. So there's an interest in placing a downward pressure on long-term care that might be achieved through more community-based methods. There's an interest, perhaps, in certainly from a critical perspective, of observing the sort of shift in responsibility that's happening, where we're increasing responsibility on communities, families, and neighbors. So overall, aging in place is becoming almost a commoditization, and now another element that's commoditized within that aging enterprise that people would have mentioned at different points before. So if we have the evidence around the importance of aging in place, we have the policy emphasis, I suppose this is the critical piece where there are concerns or efforts to support aging in place are not as productive as they should be, or at least that was our argument. So we know from various different surveys that over a third of older people can face neighborhood deprivation. We know there is still a very substantial population within institutional nursing homes and residential facilities. And we know that there's growing problems around homelessness and insecure tenure of housing as well for older people. So this introduced these kind of potential multifaceted and multi-level outcomes around exclusion and processes of outcomes around exclusion, which impact on the sustainability of communities that are already under strain, that impact on the social connectedness and service access for older people, and an impact on questions around rights and health, and particularly, again, in the context of COVID-19, a lot of those questions came up and arose. I think the critical piece apart this is that there is a lack of integration around research in terms of what we do know and around development for policy and for innovation. So there are assumptions that aging in place is achievable for everybody. There are assumptions about the homogeneity of populations. So we're not really looking at heterogeneous populations. We're not really accounting for experience of inequality in aging in place. And we're overlooking kind of major issues around life course transitions and around, community and environmental change. So all this means that our aging in place frameworks or aging in place policy goals may not be picking up and addressing the needs of the populations we're trying to serve. And it also means that it's a disjuncture between research and policy, and one that ultimately we may not be equipped to really fully deal with. So as a result, our argument in setting up this network is that the field of aging in place lacks definition, it lacks a coordinated intersectoral approach, and it lacks the kind of researchers who are equipped both in research and policy to really be able to investigate that. Again, that was our argument. Whether it's completely true or not, we'll put a question mark over. So the aim of HOMeAGE is to institute an interdisciplinary, intersectoral, international program of doctoral training and research that drives the development of new leaders in excellence for the advancement of evidence-based innovation on aging in place. We're only realizing what that means now. I think we might have taken a little bit too much in trying to do this, but either way, the network itself, it's a 48-month project, but within this, there's 36 months dedicated to a PhD program. So we have 12 doctoral researchers recruited, going to be hosted across 9 different countries, and we have a very wide network then supporting that. Each doctoral researcher will undertake their usual structured research program within their home institution, but they will also have interdisciplinary co-supervision and will undertake network-wide training as well. So a lot of what we're talking about today is actually the challenges of implementing that for people in those situations. And I suppose just to break this down a little bit further, when we think about aging in place, we probably need to think about it as particular sets of areas and particular sets of facets related to how we think about aging in place across different dimensions. And the first of these dimensions and the first of these challenges that we argued that we needed to address was around needs and systems. And ultimately, this is about the unmet need there that's around care and mobility, and indeed around housing as well. So this first objective is going to tackle that, where our first doctoral students will look at identifying flexible and sustainable housing, community care, and mobility systems, and critically assess their capacity to support community living needs across various cultural and structural conditions. And within that, across these projects, they're essentially just picking up different elements of these needs and systems. So one is looking at alternative housing models, one is looking at new mobility solutions in terms of transport, one is looking at spatial disparities of frail older people through care and support, which is based here. And one is looking at technology-enhanced housing, care, and mobility, which is also based here in Ancona. The second challenge, then, and very much a related challenge in many ways, is around that sense of home and belonging. And ultimately, there are questions about our ability to create pathways to make people feel at home, to really integrate them and build them into their communities. That's particularly because of diversity of populations and the rate of change within local areas. So our second objective is to look at harnessing new engagement pathways as a means to create channels for building a sense of home, belonging amongst diverse older populations in diverse places. And on this challenge, we have 3 doctoral researchers who are doing work at different facets of this. The first is looking at questions around belonging in terms of a virtual and digitalized world, and combating inequalities around that. The second is looking at aging in unusual places, or perhaps aging out of place. So looking at different kinds of contexts, including prisons, nursing homes, and all these different forms of different places that we have. And the third researcher is looking at change processes and those differential change processes and how they might impact in different ways on health and well-being. So if we have questions around needs and systems, and we have questions around home and belonging, then really it's a question about how we think about supporting all of these different elements in policy. And this brings us to our third and final challenge, which is around rights and representation. And ultimately is a question about whether or not we can really embrace and represent the diversity of older people, the diversity of their places, and create the sort of integrated frameworks to really support people aging in place. So on this basis, we want to identify the integrated frameworks that are responsive to the diversity of older people in their places to drive relevant and rights-based policy development on aging in place. And across these, and I know there's lots of information here in terms of different projects, but I suppose the main thing is in each case, you're trying to look at different kinds of contexts, different kinds of places. So even for these 5 doctoral researchers, they're looking at urban and rural, they're looking at urban regeneration, they're looking at age-friendly frameworks and trying to increase the diversity of those. And they're also looking at questions around rights and the importance of bringing rights into that. And they are the culmination of all the different projects, and they are this central kind of research program then that sets out for the HOMeAGE network itself. So to close off then maybe this overview section of the panel, there are a couple of things that we were asked to maybe call out a little bit. And one was, how did the idea arise, and what might it be in similar circumstances for yourselves if you're thinking about a network of this sort? Well, look, I suppose one of the elements is really about looking at where are the gaps and where are the kind of sticking points in terms of innovation, in terms of policy, and there was certainly a number of those that relates back to those 4 key points in rationale. But also what we were building on was solid networks where we had active relationships across these networks. So a network on cost action around social exclusion, a network around population aging and urbanization, and a network around a healthy aging in rural communities. So all this meant was that we could bring together these communities to actually build up a cohesive frame to try and go for this. And look, most critically, the main thing was that there wasn't an action really in this space funded before. And that really is an easier argument to begin with. And also, I guess one of the main things, I suppose, and why you might be interested in looking at this is it's reasonably well funded. You have strong fellowship funding, strong funding for fellowships, but also strong funding for the research program itself. So it certainly is beneficial in those circumstances. I guess if you were to ask then why we got funded, well, to be honest, I'm not sure we can really pull all of that out. We're not 100% sure, but there are a lot of features in all of these different actions and networks that you would see common across networks. And I suppose the challenge is to adopt those features while also making yourselves a little bit different from those. So there are a couple of things that maybe we did to try and set the application slightly apart. So I'll just take you through those very, very quickly. And the first, it comes back to the strength of the network and the size of the network. So we were very lucky in that we have well-known research centers that conduct research in this area. We have major intergovernmental organizations that are, and international civil society organizations that are within those policy processes and leading those agendas around aging in place. But ultimately, this wasn't one or two individuals drawing on their networks. This was a myriad of different groups across our network. And essentially, I suppose for any of you, it's about trying to look at, well, how can you be creative in setting up your network? How can you draw in the relationships of others and build on those relationships? So on one side, it looks like a very large network, but the main thing is that it's cohesive. It makes sense that people are involved. So it's always good to think through those sort of things. The second element is that we try to integrate a lived experience perspective. So because we hold network-wide training events, we wanted to try and bring that lived experience into those training events. And we did this by establishing a HOMeAGE reference panel. And there is no way that you can represent the full diversity of any population, let alone an older population from across all of Europe and some international contexts as well. But what we wanted to do was to bring in on-the-ground voices of older advocates from different organizations. And that's essentially what we did within this reference panel. So their voices are filtered through the training program for candidates as well. And happy to go through that at a later point if you're interested. One of the final elements is around that interdisciplinarity element. So there was always an expectation that you would have two disciplines, maybe three disciplines within a doctoral researcher's training and supervision team. In our cases, we tried to build that into the home institution where people are housed so that there was more than one discipline evident there, but also having that international collaboration to bring in other disciplines as well. And again, it was just about trying to create clarity around that interdisciplinarity and how we were going to deliver that. And the final element is really something that is not always emphasized within some of these networks, but there is a conceptual basis for drawing these networks together. There is a conceptual basis that we can build on to build an argument for why something like this should be funded, but also how we structure these networks. So on the right, the rather complex diagram there is essentially saying that we conceptualize aging in place as older people's subjective interactions across physical and infrastructural, social and cultural, and institutional dimensions of place. So these interactions then inform older people's sense of home in place and ultimately the quality of their aging in place experiences. And all we effectively did was use this conceptualization to identify the gaps that we talked about earlier, these gaps in needs and systems, these gaps in home and belonging, these gaps in rights and voice, and link those back to those various different pillars of communities. And what that meant is that we could just be a little bit more clear about our argument that we're all starting from the same approach. We're all starting from that same understanding, which is really important. We could then create a structure that allowed us to create working groups to implement the training along those different lines. So we do have training on needs and systems. We do have training on home and belonging and training on rights and voice as well. So it just allows you to be a little bit clearer about what it is you're trying to achieve. So in conclusion, well, we would certainly hope that there's lots of exciting opportunities ahead for the doctoral students and for the research network itself. And I suppose that's something that we should also be emphasized. It's not just about training, it is about a network. So if you're interested in this, it's also about committing to establishing a network and a program of work that allows you maybe to think about other projects and other challenges as well. But looking across, we do have a number of challenges that are the very features of the Marie Curie actions that we do have to report on. And that's to do with the international element, particularly in the context of aging in place, to do with the interdisciplinarity element and how we try and engender something that's true and reasonable for that, and it's to do with that intersectoral element as well. And that's essentially what the panel will be discussing today. And on that basis, then what I want to first do is introduce each of the panel members. I'll then ask each of them to make a short introduction just as to why they are interested in aging in place and how they see that kind of challenge in their own frame. And then we'll open up the discussion in terms of these questions around that international interdisciplinarity and intersectoral. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Marco Arlotti. Marco is down here. And Marco is from the Università di Politecnica here in Ancona. I'll go through everybody first and then I'll come back to you, Marco. And then we have Marja Aartsen from Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway. Then we have Lucie Vidovićová, is that right? No, ish, close enough, okay. I only know Lucie for about 6-7 years. I should really know how to pronounce her name at this stage. From Masaryk University in Brno in Czech Republic. Then we have Oswald from Goethe University in Frankfurt. So Marco, if I can ask you to maybe make your contribution first. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, good morning to everybody. Thank Kieran for your general presentation. So I'm Marco Arlotti. I'm an economic sociologist and I'm a researcher here at this university and the Department of Economic and Social Sciences, which is hosting this conference, this event. And so, as I said, my scientific background is in economic sociologist, and in particular, since my PhD thesis, I start to study the issue of population aging, in particular, the issue of care needs, looking at, in particular, about how we can understand the framing of the caring issue, looking at specific contextual dimension. In particular, my research field has been mostly focused on the Italian case in a broader comparative perspective. I have the pleasure to be involved in several national and international projects, and recently with Giovanni Lamura and other colleagues from IRCA, we've been involved in a very interesting project about aging in place, when we have the possibility to interview more than 100 people living alone in Italy, in a free region, in different contexts, from urban contexts to rural inner areas. So, and what is crucial is something that Kieran has already said. So, to avoid a sort of naive interpretation and consideration of aging place. Okay, we know that aging place is the best preference for the people, is the best also for public policy implication, but there are also dark side behind aging place. And in our empirical research, we have seen that in specific circumstances, from a contextual point of view, aging place is strongly associated with social isolation, with loneliness, exclusion. So, so in this sense, this is mostly my interest in analyzing the issue of aging place. Okay.
Thank you very much, Marco. If I can go to Marja now.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Marja Aartsen. I work at Oslo Metropolitan University in Oslo, in particular at the Research Center for Social Welfare, NOVA it's called. I think my interest in aging in place is quite recently, but it came more or less as a consequence of interest in social exclusion, because, I mean, aging in place, of course, has to do a lot with being included in a neighborhood, or being included in a social network, or being included, being accessible in a way to healthcare. And so, as being part in the ROSTED, which was actually the project that was before this, well, where this HOMeAGE project was born, more or less. So there we talked quite a lot about the different dimensions of exclusion, and neighborhood is, of course, an important one. So like I said, my own interest is quite recent, together with some colleagues who are also here. There, Linda and Heidi, were a new focus on this aging in place. We're trying to set up a special issue on that, also to gather new knowledge about this field. It's an upcoming field. It's an important field. It's a complex field. It's a social phenomena that can be it can be studied from many directions, and that's why the HOMeAGE project must be, I would say, interdisciplinary, but also intersectionary, because we need to discuss with stakeholders, with policymakers, with communities, and that's also where the challenges are. So back to my own, I'm a social gerontologist, forgot to say that, I think, and involved as a co-supervisor of one of the doctoral students who will particularly look at social rights of all the people. For example, the right to have access to a neighborhood, the right to have access to healthcare institutions, the right to social participation, the right to civic participation, and so on. And also, Lucie will be involved in that project, and the main promoter of that doctoral student is in Brussels, Lisbeth de Donder. She will be the main promoter. And then there's also a link to HOMeAGE platform, which I think is very smart in this project, because it's so important to see how the policies are around that. And I think I leave it here now.
Okay, thank you very much, Marja. And I'll just pass this to Lucie. If that works.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lucie Vidovićová, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm representing Center for Research on Aging, which is a working group under the Department of Sociology at the Masaryk University in Brno, Czech Republic. I have two of my wonderful colleagues there with me in the corner, and I'm very privileged to be part of HOMeAGE because it really broadens the topics we already been researching for some years now. But it was the similar conference to this when I first heard about how important or how challenging is gentrification in the cities for older people. And I realized, wow, that's something we haven't been looking at in my context. And we went and done a research about aging in big cities in Czech Republic. And then we realized the next step would be, of course, to look at aging in rural areas. And all these huge 3 years projects, year after year, we were realizing how important is aging in place, and older people would, report, we want to stay where we are, we want to age here, kind of regardless what the place looked like, which was quite intriguing. And then we realized how important is place attachment for quality of life, and how people are actually satisfied with their lives, and also how important is the concept of person-environment fit, how these two things kind of work together. And the next step, when we were seeing that these kind of context matters, we realized that there are places that are just not fulfilling the kind of general or culture definition of what home means and how home looks like. I don't know how about you guys, but even with my family, when we are somewhere out and living in a hotel or staying in a hotel, not living, and we would be out in the city, and then we would say, oh, let's go home. And we meant go to the hotel. And that means that, there are really different aspects of how we define home. And I was also privileged to be part of a little project that was looking at aging in a prison. And that really opened my eyes in how the physical space is so important for also what we understand as old age, and how that can really matter or change. Depending on the physical and cultural space. So all these put together, we realized that there are people aging in unusual spaces and places, also kind of out of the typical spaces and places, and we know very little about that. So we want also use this type of, which may seem to be as a marginal topics, that it's not for huge number of people who are aging in this context, but to actually take their perspectives to challenge this great concepts of what does it mean to be aging in place, what home means, and what aging means. So really kind of redefine these big concepts of place attachment and person-environment fit. And the doctoral researcher that will start to look at these places we'll still have to find kind of the main scope. One of the approaches that is now kind of offering itself is to look at people with migrant backgrounds and, you know, their experience of changing the places and aging in places that they kind of didn't plan to age in, right? They had different plans probably for their life course, how that is challenging their quality of life, but also look at these particular other types of environments. So we are very excited to start this, and we are also very grateful for the network support, because this, again, this is not something you will be easily grasped. So that all the support we are getting, it's something that help us to look forward to this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucie and Frank.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and for that panel. And yes, my name is Frank from Frankfurt. This is easy to remember, by the way. But anyway, what else can I say? What hasn't been said yet? My background is in psychology. So maybe another perspective on how people from a more person-centered perspective deal with aging in place. But since the last, I have to admit, 30 years or so, I'm sticking in the environmental gerontology field now. So this is interdisciplinary, and we sit together with colleagues from different disciplines, which is also one of those intersection, interdisciplinary, and so on. So this is one of the emphasis as well here. What we did as a team, as a group, of course, during the last decades is to also think of this concept of place or aging in place, and on theory development over the last years. So this is maybe something we can also make use of it in this program. And also, I have to admit this, Kieran, also to maybe ask the question if we need to reconsider the concept of aging in place towards maybe another more feasible, more useful idea of place and aging, and to avoid some, as you said, romantic ideas of what does this mean for the future, and maybe to make this concept fit for the future as well, to have a better, a more useful approach with respect to digitalization, globalization, climate change, and so on. I think this might be one of the perspectives to be contributed here as well. And maybe sometimes a view back on the historic development on theories might be useful in that sense also for us. Us in that sense means the doctoral students working on this empirically, and this is what I think can contribute here as well. We did some work also, for instance, on the concepts of agency and belonging. And it turns out, that if you sort out the theories, you see there is different generations of theories in environmental gerontology as well. And I think we might also come across the need to discuss interaction of person and environment versus transaction of person and environment. And at the moment, having in mind this interdisciplinary perspective, a more co-constructive idea of growing together person in environments, and how this might be particularly important if you look at people who are socially excluded and included on the other hand. What is working well, what is not so good in that sense. And yeah, that is maybe something for the next round again to discuss the different projects. But that would be my interest, and I think my background so far, and maybe enough for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank, and thanks to all the individual contributors. So we're going to begin our panel discussion now. So we have some set questions here, but we would certainly encourage participation from the audience. So as we move through the questions, please raise your hand, and there will be time then for open questions and answers at the end as well. What I should say is, and it's probably going to be peppered through all the different answers that you're going to hear, is that a lot of this actually does depend on the composition of the doctoral student network that we've recruited, and that network is very diverse. So we have 4 people from a European context, but we have the remainder coming from international contexts, including quite a high proportion from low and middle income countries. So that will provide a way of challenging, I suppose, some of the theories, some of the ideas that we might have, and also perhaps produce some other lessons that we need to probably harness, both in terms of the learning and the training, but also in terms of the research. So we're going to move on to our panel discussion and our first question. So I'm going to hand over to Marco to pose this to the panel.
Thank you, Kieran. Yes, very briefly, I've been working on entrepreneurship and silver, older entrepreneurship for several years. And differently from other disciplines, math, statistics, or macroeconomics, I found that in entrepreneurship, you need to use different tools, different approaches, very different way of approaching the same issue. This is the reason why the story I'm telling you, this is the reason why I found myself very comfortable when Kieran introduced the three item interdisciplinarity, intersectoral, and international approach to the issue. I think this is the real way of approaching to this issue. So I would like to, let's say, to focus and ask panelists what they think about the first of the three items, interdisciplinarity, because there are several options, of course, a positive option concerning the way in which we can put together different disciplines, but also challenges in managing things which probably are very different, the way we are used to approach to the issue. So if I can ask Frank, because you just raised the issue of the interdisciplinarity. So I would like to know your point about that. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot for asking this question. I mean, it's a core question, of course, and I think maybe two points to be considered also in our group is I think basically we have to admit that interdisciplinarity is not necessarily a good thing as in general, but if you come from different problem-oriented perspectives on certain issues out there in the world, so to say, and we have this strong connection also with the practical field, then you see you won't get the right answer just with one discipline. So that makes the need for interdisciplinarity more visible. For instance, we had a project on, avoiding violence in healthcare. There you need some more background, not just from the social science, but you need the ethics, you need the law, you need those information. Or another thing is if you have a project on city planning, then you need some urban planners, you need some maybe architects, you need some mobility people in. So I think it's coming from the problem, it's coming from the issue, it's coming from the topic our research participants, our doctoral students, our doctoral workers will work on. The other thing is we need also to keep in mind, and this is more maybe a practical organizational thing, that the doctoral students are making their dissertations still in the old world of universities where we have disciplines and they have to qualify in certain disciplines. So it's about us to guarantee a disciplinary perspective, but also open up the floor for them to feel safe enough to sitting between the chairs. So that's, I think, is a kind of a challenge I feel. And we all of us have been successful maybe already in doing these dissertations during the last years and so, but I think this is a challenge we have to face, and we have to name it, the elephant in the room, so to say. So it's nice for us to think about interdisciplinary perspectives, but we have to keep in mind that we also have still the way of thinking in disciplines. By the way, not talking about publications, but anyway, that would be my, one of the issues with respect to challenges regarding the interdisciplinarity.
I think it goes even deeper in social gerontology being interdisciplinary kind of in its own. And I have this very sad story, and I hope what happens in Ancona stays in Ancona. So what I'm to say, I'm not very proud of it, but we had some thesis from the field of social gerontology, and my colleagues would say, well, this is something that can fly on the 5th floor where the social care is and social work. So this is not sociology. And this is challenges that we will be really facing, probably also with our doctoral researchers, and how to find the understanding between different floors and departments and all the different fields. But I really agree with not finding the right answer from one discipline, and also not from one method, right? That it's very deep quarrel between quantitative and qualitative, or the economics and sociological methods, and everything that I believe we have now the opportunity to actually prove that this is the right way to go, because I think it's a good science in a way also to constantly challenge yourself and your points of view, and accepting other people's view. Maybe, you are adding something very important which just wasn't in my field, within my discipline, the approach. So I believe this is something that can be challenging, but also very, very fruitful for further enhancing. And that's goes into different chapter of our challenges. But just how do we talk to the policy makers, because they need to see the whole picture, right? And that helps with the interdisciplinarity.
Many things already said by Frank and Lucie, so I fully agree with them. And from my experience, starting involvement in a research project where the interdisciplinarity was strong. So I think from an analytical point of view, of course, we are all agree that it's important to develop interdisciplinary research project, but is completely related to what has been already said by my colleague. But what I think is important is a sort of precondition, because of course it is important to valorize the differentiation, but it is important, crucial, in particular at the beginning, to define a common ground. No? I'm not have the pleasure to be in your project since the beginning, but it is quite clear that there's been an attempt to create a common ground. No, a common ground that concern the concept definition. Because in many cases, for instance, we use the same concept, for instance, the concept of context, but we attributed completely different meaning. So I remember when I was involved in a project when we worked with urban planners, and we had a different interpretation and position of meaning about the context. So for them, there was a strong link with spatial implication. For us, as economic sociology, was an institutional dimension. That means the fact that we consider also a long-term system as a contextual dimension, the policy that shape care needs. So in this sense, I think it's very crucial to be sure that this precondition is guaranteed. Otherwise, there is that the implementation of the research project can be undermined, and also the outcome of the research project can be undermined as well. So to find as possible this common minimum denominator that, of course, should valorize the specific, the peculiarity of each discipline, but at some time also to try to find this common ground.
Yeah, thank you. I think I can add to this. I fully agree with my previous speakers. I can add to this maybe my own experience as when I was a PhD student. That my topic was a bit between psychology and sociology, and when I did research on social relations and cognitive decline, and when I sent my paper to a social journal, they were saying it's way too psychological, and if I sent it to a psychological journal, they say it's way too social. So that is really a challenge for the PhD student to find a good outlet for these multidisciplinary research. But at the same time, I think this is aging in place is so multidimensional. You cannot get the full picture by only focusing on one dimension. So this is a challenge that here has to be solved in a way, but we should be aware. I think another challenge is also that we talk different languages basically between disciplines. That I think it has to do with your precondition, what you mentioned. And also we have different data and different methods. So how to write a paper in sociological papers, journals, is different from epidemiological journals and different from economists. And so where to find this midway, that is, I think, a challenge which has to be solved in a way.
Second question, any question from the floor? or experience. Yes. Okay, I think we can move to the second. Yes.
So I think, and just before we move on to the second question, there is a piece about the rewards for interdisciplinarity. So we talked about we need to unpack the challenges. Sorry. Okay.
You just be closer. Okay.
Closer, better. Okay. So there is a question about the rewards for interdisciplinarity. So we talked about the idea of being able to unpack these challenges through multiple disciplines and so on. And if we find that language, if we find those elements, I guess there is a piece that we all report back to our individual disciplines and our research centers, and we tick how many publications we get, we tick how much funding we have. And usually the funding piece is there as that kind of marker of the interdisciplinarity. But when it comes to journal publications, when it comes sometimes to dissertations, sometimes promotions, the focus is back on the disciplines. And it becomes interesting that you have to rank your journals by particular domains. Now, it was never really an issue for me. I did my PhD in a manufacturing operations engineering department. I had my supervisor was a psychologist, and we came out with something that was very much human factors. So we were already going in these directions. But ultimately, we have that cushion of social gerontology and gerontology in general to provide that source. But you are still asked to link it to, in my case, business journals, in other cases, perhaps psychology and sociology journals. So I think that's probably a part of the challenge as well for us. But okay, so on to our second question or second dilemma. And again, if at any stage you want to interject, please do. And I think this is one that is going to the other eye around international. And really, it's about the challenges in trying to conduct an international program of research that allows us to pull out transferable lessons, but it is also context specific. So you've seen the multitude of projects that we've identified as being very specific to different kinds of contexts and different kinds of places. And it's also perhaps about this idea of recruiting doctoral students who are from outside your own context. So they have the extra challenge perhaps of doing that research in different host countries. So I would like to open this up to the panel and to see what solutions people have so that we can incorporate them in the next few months and years. So anybody would like to go first? Okay, Lucie.
Embarrass myself again. No, that proven to be bigger challenge than we expected from the beginning, because it was, of course, we are working in international context. I mean, look at ourselves here right now, and so it's obvious it's easy. But then when we started kind of, actually maybe even drafting the call for positions, we just thought, how we are going to, how we are going to do this in very practical terms, because the students were expected to move into our countries and bring their families with them, and that already can be asking a lot, and then also work with us in our local languages, right? At least, or understand the culture, or being ready to understand the culture. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that we expected also kind of more interest in the pool will be slightly kind of bigger, but that may have been proven the limitation for probably a lot of potential interest in this. But we were really supporting people also within our countries to apply for to go around the network. So that bear a fruit, I think it's the expression. And in our case, we were, I may say, lucky enough that we have cultures that are close, for example, to our own, and that the researcher that we finally got for our position will be able to learn the language fairly quickly, and will be also able to work with older people themselves without relying on any interpretations, for example. But I have to admit, I didn't realize at first that it's actually maybe kind of bigger challenge, because we were, as I say, kind of, I work internationally every day, so it was easy to forget about things that as we will go down to the field with people from outside our culture, that may be a challenge to come across. Would you?
Okay, go ahead. Good. Well, So I think I can add that the doctoral student that I'm involved in she is a very, very strong candidate with extremely good skills, I would say, otherwise she wouldn't be selected. But she comes from Cuba and will work in Belgium. I think it's a huge cultural difference between these two worlds. Well, language is certainly a problem. And I think even though you can learn a language, it takes a while before you understand the practices and how to, really understanding a language and really using the words that are effective is something else. So that's one. Language is, I think, one thing. And another thing is you have this power dynamics, I think. I have experience with working and the privilege to work with a group from Romania. They're also here in the audience. And before with Lucie's project with 5 different countries. And there was Kieran involved as well. So there you see that there is power dynamics in the way that the Western Europe is more privileged in a way to have better access to papers, better access to library, have more economic resources. And before you know, that has become the dominant narrative in a group. And maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want to hear the more silent narrative in a way, and to learn from other cultures and narratives. Other cultures and perspectives on things. That means that you need to listen, and that's not always easy if communication is limited in a way.
Okay. Thank you. Fully agree, of course, with the consideration and reflection of my colleague. And regarding this question, so more than an answer, so I feel to problematize further in the sense that already yesterday we started to discuss about this. And so from my experience, so of course, international research program give us the opportunity to develop strongly the comparative method, okay, which is a crucial and very powerful tool for understanding. So for instance, in my case, the Italian case, you cannot understand it deeply without contrasting with other experience, Scandinavian experience, but also other South European country as well. But my feeling is that even on one hand, there is this opportunity that international project, large comparative analysis can provide. On the other hand, there is a sort of trade-off, because sometimes my feeling is that we are not able fully to give an interpretation of this differentiation emerging. So we identify the differentiation, but we are not able to fully interpret the differentiation. And this requires, maybe this is a bias for me, because in economic sociology, the concept of embeddedness is essential in my reflection, but we miss the deep embeddedness of the result that emerge in a specific national context, in a specific precondition. And so I think that in this sense, for instance, we analyze often cross-sectional data, and we focus on the present, but we miss that the present is embedded in the past. And what we miss is this reconstruction on long-term trajectory of path dependence, that are very important in order to understand what is emerging in a given temporal time frame. So I think that this aspect is very important, and it gives us the possibility to understand better and to interpret better this cross-national variation. And related to this is the fact that considering this comparative effort, we have a sort of assumption that countries are homogeneous, but they are not absolutely homogeneous. There are strong internal variation. And so in this sense, they need to go in the detail of each country in order to grasp it. It is very a tricky issue, because, for instance, as far as quantitative methods, so we have a problem of sample representativeness. So there are many, but it is very important to not stop this general level, because country are very complex. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to add at least one point, which is close to what Lucie said, and I would frame it as making making a strength out of a weakness in a way. So we had this, restriction at the beginning to ask for a person to come to the different countries without having lived there for the last 5 years, which is, in other words, also an obstacle with respect to the language. So now if you want to make fieldwork in a certain country, it might be good to speak the language. So how to deal with that? Restrictions on the European level, maybe for good reasons, of course. On the other hand, having that and how to turn it into a, I would say, strength meanwhile. For instance, I will show you that with the person we have now on board, Rua Shaban. She's, I think, otherwise would not have had the chance to be part of this project if she could not, for instance, now fill into that kind of gap in terms of that we use this restriction and address a group of people who are not German speaking in German. So an urban group, older adults with a migrant background and speaking Arabic language. So we would not have had the chance to get access to this group if we would not have a person doing a dissertation coming from an Arabic cultural and language background. So Rua comes from Syria and made her master thesis in Hungary and learned, in short time English. And I think she will be also keen to learn German. However, I think nevertheless, this is international in a new generation way. So this is not, being foreign in another land, but having a transition history in a way and reflecting as we have that in another, kind of a summer school. We had this July with 28 people coming from different disciplines, and you see that it's not 28 people from 28 countries, but 28 people reflecting 35 countries. So this is international in a future way of research thinking, and I think I'm really kind of glad and happy that we had this restriction now turning into the opposite in a way, and also challenging us as supervisors, to host these people, and gladly having this great resource of international supportive group led by Kieran, and having this very structured idea of being 4 months here and 4 months there, and having all this, which gives a great resource for the individual participants. So let's see what's get out of this. But I think this is kind of the way of future international research we really facing here.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose there's just one follow-up question, and maybe if anybody wanted to respond to this. So this is in terms of, I guess, a part of that international mobility has attracted more attention to us thinking about scale. And, when we think about aging in place, we gravitate maybe towards neighborhoods and communities, maybe towards our home environments. But we're obviously thinking about regions and home nations and all these different contexts. So it has maybe made us challenged in that respect as well. But it also maybe brings into focus that kind of multilateral policy system, the influence of large international European agendas, and across some of our students that are coming in, there isn't actually as much of a cultural distinction, or certainly the cultural distinction is there, but maybe the policy element is being slightly more homogenized because of these international agendas. So just wondering if anybody wanted to speak to that, and whether that's something that you think you can probe within the context of your own research studies. I see glazed eyes. Marja is looking away from me. Giovanni.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to give a few seconds more to the panelists to think about your additional questions. No, but I wanted to go back to the previous one, and because talking about the challenges of international research programs and connecting to what Frank was saying, I think in addition to what has been mentioned, maybe we should also underline two potentials, especially of a program like this one. One is that you can look at your own context with different eyes. If someone comes from elsewhere, something you give for granted actually could be unexpected, strange for someone entering your culture. So I think this is really an enrichment for your own research environment on one hand, and this is, of course, translates into different research questions and many facets. And secondly, in this program where you have 12 doctoral researchers connecting to each other, you have the additional effect that they are enriching each other, but also questioning each other about what they are doing in their own countries. So you are connecting not only through the supervisor, but of course through the students themselves. So I think we should underline also these sides as a counterpart of the challenges which are there, and they are not small. So just wanted to share.
Great, thank you. Anybody else wants to make a contribution at this stage? Oh, okay, there's a question here.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting discussions, and I'm not a researcher or academic, I'm a policy person. So I've got a question about, in terms of the research under this program, is there a focus on looking at class and economic, I guess, bases and assumptions for aging in place? I know we talked about social exclusion, but I feel like there's so much underlying assumptions about people having a place that's stable and that's theirs, so they can age well in place. So I'd be really interested to hear about how that's coming through in the research. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Yes, I think would be the short answer, but again, it's perhaps something that needs to be patterned through the various different projects, but maybe we can just, I know there's a couple of projects that are probing specifically on that. And Lucie, I guess your project, because you are looking at that transient nature of some of those kind of housing systems and different kind of contexts. If you want to say something.
Yeah, very much, and you're absolutely right. And this is actually very good as coming from the policy side, because this is what I feel also in the policies, how they are made, and going back also to the international expectations within the policies, that they may mention some heterogeneity, but not really in my readings. And this the projects are really trying to kind of disentangle this and say, yes, there are places that may not be the best to live and get old in, and then people's circumstances are far from ideal, right? And there are reasons for that, and really to look into these reasons, and if there are any policy possibilities to address those, that will be a great challenge for several projects within that. And that was specifically also the reason why we kind of had this aging in unusual places and out of place as one of the headlines. I don't know if the class, going back to the economists.
Very briefly, I would say. No, of course, in our case, as I said, the research project will focus in particular on precondition of aging place, no? And in particular, how we can consider among these preconditions the role of technology, okay, and technological innovation. But we can think about technological innovation also in terms of a condition that can, of course, create opportunities for a good aging place, but also as a social phenomenon that require additional precondition. In the sense that when we think about, maybe this example could be very banal, but about the use of technological device. So this requires skill about the use of this device. And also when we think about the use of device for making possible so the reduction of architectural barrier. So when there is not, I would say, a public support, this require a private expenditure. And so in the sense, in our research project, we'll also try to consider how the impact of technological innovation can increase or not the an implication from the in terms of social disparity. So this will be absolutely very crucial.
May I just maybe add one tiny little thing as a psychologist, having no idea about class, but nevertheless, you know, just one tiny little thing. I think it's also maybe interesting. I mean, we know about this exclusion thing in the neighborhood and that people, you know, live 10 years longer if they have a right neighborhood and these things you might address with it. But I think it could also be a chance, seeing our mixture of methods, how to address this in the different projects, to ask the question how and why people overcome this exclusion in certain circumstances and how these particular, contextual circumstances could be, you know, also to be overcome. Being an older woman living alone from a lower class in a bad neighborhood, but nevertheless being happy. How on earth is that, you know, possible? Yeah, cope. I would avoid. Oh, I'm avoiding to use the word coping as a psychologist. Anyway, no, but you know, I mean, the thing is how these processes might be turned out to a different outcome in a way could also be very interesting.
Okay, thanks very much. And I suppose specifically then there are maybe 4 or 5 projects that engage directly with socioeconomic status. One just around housing and alternative housing models. So that was the first doctoral researcher position that will be looking at these housing models and how they can be applied in low-income areas. There's also others that would look at the context of urban regeneration in low-income areas as well. But I think Frank's point and indeed Marco's point, you can think about this in different ways. You can think about it in terms of these enabling factors and these constraints and relocation. So some of the work of Malcolm Cutching around this idea of place integration is a constant process where we have to weigh up, is this place giving us what we need? Can we remake the idea of being at home in this place through life, be it because of personal change or because of other life circumstances? And what ways can socioeconomic factors determine those kind of decisions and influence those decisions? But I think the subjective and objective element that Frank raised is really important, because we've always struggled to try and address that, whether it's indexes of social exclusion, whether it's indexes of even relative poverty. And I think we do have an issue around trying to unpack this aspect of relative appreciation matched with notions of belonging, and which one is actually driving people's perception. And I think it'd be too much to stand back and say that's just socially constructed because norms and values. You know, I think across our research, people we've interviewed, people we've involved in research are very good at actually stepping back and reflecting on their own life course experiences. And they understand very much the relative weighting of those priorities. So I think right across a number of projects this will come in, but thank you for your question. Okay, so I think we'll move on to our final question now, which is challenges for an intersectoral research training program on policy and impact. So I guess at the outset of this, we emphasize this idea that any real advancements in terms of aging in place, we argued, has to be from a position of a research structure, position between the scientific world and that idea of affecting policy and practice for positive change. So again, that is mapped onto the network itself, where each of the doctoral students have co-supervisors from different sectors, sometimes innovation, sometimes policy, and sometimes practice. And I guess what we're trying to do now is to break down the practicalities of that and what that actually looks like in people's actual projects themselves. So I'll open this up to the panel and see if anybody wants to raise any issues or any potential solutions already.
Let me say one last embarrassing thing about our context, and that's that it actually, talking with our policymakers, often it actually kind of is the leverage, or what helps is that it's coming from the international field, or that, you know, it's brought up by the international project, and this is what is in and trendy outside, and it's, of course, therefore it's better, and this is what we should look up to. And that I realized that it's very helpful to have this also international policies that kind of are being able to we are able to kind of adapt or see how they are functional in our context. And this is what I also hope that we will be able to work with within the program as such, and to also somehow find ways how what we as academia know, how can we translate that into the language, and we are back into interdisciplinarity, that the policy field kind of understand, they are able to take as their own and promote that, which is not always easy. We are struggling a lot, for example, with any aging policies right now in Czech Republic. The department that was devoted for preparing active aging strategies is closing down in a way. The only there's one lady left who is in charge of any policy developments. So it's a challenge that's also ahead of us. I don't know how in 3 years this will play out, if there will be any department dealing with aging policies. And I hope that the projects as ours will be able to support these transfers of the knowledge into the policies.
Can I take it now? Yeah, so I think, I mean, in research, always it's complicated or is challenged to be very intersectional. I mean, to combine the policy and the research, I find it personally already a challenge. If I think of writing a research proposal, for example, I mean, the excellent part, that goes well, but then it comes to dissemination and to implementation, and like, oh my goodness, I need my imagination to write it. Or so that is, I think for academics, always a challenge to get, well, the research out in the real life. But I think what helps is to think all the time, okay, what is the reason why we do this? What do we want to achieve? And then I think we come to a place where we speak sort of the same language. So if in this HOMeAGE, for example, we think the final ideas, I guess, to increase quality of life of all the people in a way. So if that is in the back of our mind while doing the research, it's easier. And in the particular case of the doctoral students I'm involved in, she will be has an internship at a policy, at an NGO, which I think is a very, very smart part of the program to have real internships with policymakers. That's a very, very, very smart move, I think, in the project.
Okay, thank you. So again, so sorry for that, but I am not solution for this answer, but maybe I increase the complexity in the sense that there are 2 points related to this question. One point concerned the issue of intersectoral, okay, the sectoral analysis and research. So I mean, it is of course related to what we have already talked about before when we analyze the issue of interdisciplinarity. But so I think that here a crucial risk is the risk of stratification. The sense that we may consider intersectoral research as okay, we put several research perspective, but we have a sort of stratification. While I think that the crucial issue is to look at intersection, okay? And when we look at intersection, we can find something that is completely new, no? It is not just a sum, no? An addition of several specific sectoral research, but it's an attempt to have a look to the intersection, something that has been not done so far. So, and this is very tricky, not very easy, but I think that in this doctoral research network, this could be very innovative. No? Try to identify something that is completely new in regard to what we have seen so far in terms of sectoral perspective. And as far as the policy implications, so early morning, so I reflect about this, and of course we are so. There is a need to have an attention to policy implication, okay? And I would say now is usual to conclude the article with discussion of policy implication, and it is logical in relation to the legitimacy of the social science, no? For improving the world conditions, so social justice. So of course there is an ethical motivation also. But I think that sometimes also there is a need that research is policy free, in the sense that the risk is to create a sort of vicious circle. When you are, so you try to analyze only policy issue in a given period, with a risk that maybe you neglect to analyze issues that are not relevant from a policy perspective now, but that can be relevant in the future, no? And also because we know the decision maker have a very short perspective. So I think that is very, again, tricky, but it is important to valorize the policy implication, but also to work in a direction that the research is completely free from policy implication. And in order to see something that is new and not taken. Okay.
There's maybe just a few nearby additional issues, and I'm not raising the need to have a good impact on policy from the research, but I want to turn it around in a way and to kind of, do a provocate statement from a research perspective, also to say that I think it's good to have them on board from the very beginning, as you mentioned, all the organizations, to make clear that they have some kind of a responsibility for the outcome as well. Not just the researchers. Oh, sorry for, I mean, this is for a research perspective. It's not at the end, the dissemination process. Oh, yes, there is policy around, but also to have them, within that from the very beginning. So the other thing is that I think it's, as we have, mentioned that within the interviews as well, that this might also address the need to have different kind of project outcomes, type of text, type of products from the projects to be considered. A research publication is totally different to a policy paper where you want to address people to be involved in a certain whatever community engagement project or whatever. Third point is that I think this challenges us also with respect to the methods, as we have seen this participatory research methods. And finally, and maybe not too not very unimportant, is also if we think about the future perspective for our candidates, there might be some positions also in the policy field, not only in research. So what do they do with their dissertation later? Maybe they disseminate this knowledge by going into the communities, to the institutional organizations, and doing work there and being there and trying to change the world for better there.
Well, on the practical terms, we several of the doctoral researchers have also a history in working with different NGOs and being kind of, in touch with the policy previously. So I think it's also a big blessing that they are not going into unknown. They have worked. Petra, in our case, was working with Amnesty International. I think our other colleague was as well involved very much with policy. So it's a cycle, like we were saying. Some of them are coming from the policy making into the research and maybe going back to policy. So that will be actually very fruitful in the end. They will support the careers.
Okay, thanks very much. So I mean, one of the things, just as you're speaking there, I mean, one of the challenges in a lot of our contexts is around implementation deficits, that sometimes we're good at creating the policies, but not great at enacting them. And I think just thinking about this program, that's probably one of the things that people hopefully will get an awareness of, is how to try and motivate that sort of implementation through different ways that may not necessarily always be about resources. It might be about shared understandings, or it might be just about leveraging relationships that they have garnered and understand through this process. And that seems to be a key aspect as well. So we do have some minutes for questions. So if anybody would like to ask a question on the panel, we would certainly encourage it. We are aware that we're keeping you from your morning coffee, so we will look to close this down reasonably soon. But if anybody has a question, please do raise your hand. Just over here.
Good morning. I was wondering whether the panel could say anything about how the project engages the target groups, so like the older adults themselves. I mean, it was mentioned, but could you expand on that, how you do that? Thanks.
Okay, so maybe I can answer it at the program level, and then we can go to the individual projects. So there's just one example there in terms of trying to bring some sort of voice in from a lived experience, but it really is at the level of advocates. I mean, the people that we're involving in that panel are involved with Age Platform Europe themselves. So they're obviously very strong advocates in terms of understanding the grassroots issues, but they're not directly from these different community contexts, I suppose. They're also exceedingly really well skilled in a multitude of different ways. So I think we will be tested and challenged by that group as well, who consist of ex-architects, planners, people from social gerontology and academics. So it's really interesting for us to have that group. But I guess the other aspect that we're really going to try and push for is at network-wide training events, where these events are hosted biannually, and we need to try and encourage a lived experience perspective coming through those local contexts. So in each of these events, we are hoping to design either that perspective being brought in to the training, be it in terms of on-the-ground issues that they need active responses to, or that help us think through a particular thing like needs and systems or particular gaps around home and belonging from that area. But ultimately it's trying to capture that. So that's at the program level, but there's probably other things that we need to consider and do more broadly as well. But maybe just to say, maybe some words about the individual projects and how you might be looking to engage across methods or across other elements, if anybody wants to pick that up.
It's almost too early to answer this question, Almar, because we have, well, the PhD student is now started 2 weeks ago, and soon we will have the first meeting where we set up the whole project for the 3 years. But we talked about it briefly where in the interview. So how to, with her background, with not speaking Dutch or Flemish, or that is a challenge. So that's what we saw. But there will be an attempt to include the opinion, at least of the older people. And well, this particular PhD student will be based actually at Age Platform, which is an organization that's sort of the voice of the older person himself. So yeah.
We have the same case that the one of the secondments is actually with older people's organization. So this and this is, though it seems to be kind of level of Age Platform, but they are actually much lower in a field. They are more kind of a community organization for older people that, you know, they come for coffee and I don't know, language lessons. So this is one of the secondments, but it's also more in terms like how to really engage older persons themselves in the policy development. So to a slightly higher level, but of course, and that goes back to one of the points we were discussing earlier, looking really into the lived experience, the voices of other people to be heard, or to kind of translate them for the outside world if they cannot do it themselves. That's one of the important questions also in the like giving like making them the pivot of what we are doing. And we're discussing here in the technology lessons, like we talk about how technologies, how we are lacking the skills to keep up with technologies, but maybe it should be the other way around. And I feel also this, you know, that the older voices should be in forefront, especially in the context like ours in the home and belonging. And will be.
Yeah, I can just add to that. It's a bit early, as you said, Marja, now to see how, you know, method-wise that could be done. But I think the aim would be also, at least in our case, to really address this group and to give them a voice, really in terms of language, so to say, for the first time. And I would like to add that we as researchers have been criticized not to have that chance before to really address, for instance, people who are not speaking well German in a German urban environment, to you know, see what for instance home and belonging means to them being abroad, you know, how technology like smartphones and other things might work for them. So maybe we have concepts in our head on belonging and control belief and whatsoever that is not really well adjusted to this group, and might you know, we might also find out something based on their saying that really adjusted our concepts in the end. So I would also say this is a subtle, hopefully, you know, it gives something back to us as well, to get those voices being heard.
So, and just more broadly, I think most of the projects employ mixed methods. So there's always going to be a focus on trying to include some sort of qualitative in-depth piece about that lived experience. The projects are also, and I'm reminding myself here as well as everybody else, they're also encouraged to set up reference panels for the project that start at the start so that people can help inform those questions of how practical, how helpful they really are, and how valuable they are to people participating in those panels. It's a question for another day, but certainly that's a part of it as well. But thank you very much for your question. Okay, one more.
But we have seen the many challenges of this program, and those who have to address these challenges together with us are the doctoral researchers. So here there is one of the 12, so maybe it's the right place also to welcome Petra, which will be involved in one of these topic with us here. And so welcome Petra, because we have discussed a lot, but they will do much of the work with us.
So Petra, aside from asking you to give a 10-minute presentation about your experience over the last week and a half, we might leave that go till next time. And I think we're just out of time. So I'd like to thank you all for coming early on a Friday morning after such a wonderful dinner last night. And thank you for your attention and for your contributions. Thank you.